who's there. Captain Deep? Is that you? Hey, easy there, soldier. Don't talk too much, okay? Otherwise your lungs are going to burst. But yes, it's me, Captain Deep. Captain, I'm so sorry. It was just one guy, but it didn't matter how many times we'd shoot him. He would just appear again and again. I know, soldier. I know. It's not your fault. You did a great job. Did I? Oh, that's great then. Captain? Yes, soldier. What is it? Can I... May I ask you for something? Go ahead. Would you hold into this for me? And keep it safe. Don't matter where you go. So it won't spoil. That's my most treasure. Would you do this for me, Captain? Since I did a great job. Soldier, I'll take this to my grave if I have to. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Because I don't think I have much time left. Yeah. You don't. Where are you going now, sir? What are you going to do? Me? I am going to review this game. I love you, Captain! See you in hell, soldier. Metal Slug, one of the icons from the arcade era, a time when kids from all around the world would actually leave their houses in order to play their video games. I know it sounds insane, but it's true. And even though Metal Slug would only be released more towards the end of that iconic period, that doesn't mean it wasn't able to captivate its public. This run-and-gun game with some charming graphics and well-humored vibe would launch in 1996 for Neo Geo by either Nazca or SNK. I'm not quite sure which one of them both was, but I think it was Nazca that would be later on absorbed by SNK. And I think today SNK is the owner of Metal Slug and other relatively known titles of the time. Metal Slug was one of my favorite arcade games from my childhood, and I still hold great memories of playing it with my cousin every summer vacation, so it's only fair that it would be one of the subjects from my analysis where I judge its content comparing it to nowadays titles. And with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, this is my Metal Slug Deep Review.
Metal Slug!
The first thing that stands out in any video game is really the aesthetics. And Metal Slug doesn't really have a proper aesthetical identity when we look at it as a whole, but their machinery designs are definitely something that stands out. The first boss of the game is something that seems to have been built from an airplane together with woods and cannons, and that is a really interesting concept. It serves as some sort of weaponized wall but built from scratch. The game also presents mini-bosses, and one of them is a cannon that was built to be compatible with railroads, which is also very interesting and gives the impression that it was something built to guard a place, since those railroads don't exactly go anywhere. Most of the bosses and some of the mini-bosses have very appealing designs. The thematic that it was something built from war leftovers with things they could find along the way is definitely something you don't see very often. This is the type of thing that gives visual identity to video games that have similar graphics, especially because the artists really put effort on those designs. This is evident, and despite the rest of the designs not having the same unique sense of aesthetics, that is simply unconnected with the quality of the work presented for the machines. Every single stage in this game is also beautiful. It's classy, it's detailed, it's three-dimensional, even in a platform experience. I would honestly say that Metal Slug is one of the best looking games for Neo Geo. And that is even more true for its background. For me, Metal Slug have one of the best looking background designs in video games, even if compared to recent titles. They blend in with the stages beautifully. The transition from the actual stage to the background is nearly imperceptible and in some cases completely imperceptible. But the thing Metal Slug doesn't really have is light and shadow play. While it does have them designed in the background, the models and the stages lack them almost completely. They are mildly engraved with their designs when you start to pay attention, but at the same time, that is really discreet. Proportion is another thing that is usually distorted in cartoon designs. You can see that the war tanks and other similar machines are basically the same height as the human characters. I understand that this is intentional, it's like that to make the bosses more imposing and mob characters less threatening, but that doesn't mean it's not a distortion. And as for dimensioning, I want to say that it's all good, save some exceptions on stage 3. Either the space between cliffs are too far apart or their dimensions are a bit screwed up, because some jumps are really complicated and that was not very pleasant to experience. But to be fair, it was only one or maybe two jumps. They also use almost no reskinning in this game, which is honestly the bare minimum for a game this size, but still praisable. And I still have to talk about the characters itself. For the main character designs, it's really very basic and doesn't really have any details worth mentioning. The same thing goes for the mob characters. Simple designs, show what you need to show, and this is the standard for this game. It's not like the designs of the characters have negative points, it's just that they don't really have any positive either. They don't have any visual appeal that is worth being recognized. But their animations though, that is for sure in another level. The animations are not vastly superior to designs by any means, but they are definitely superior. To start off, the characters are never static, they always have movement on them. Their frames of animations are not that long, but they still have clear and well-established arcs. Mob characters also die in different ways depending on the type of death they suffered. They also imbue special effects in some enemy animations to signal danger to the player. In cold places, you can see the main character's breath. That is definitely a nice touch. As for the special effects, some of the designs are worse, some are definitely better, but in general they are good. Some of the shots are straight up just an orange energy that I don't necessarily dislike, especially because I also can't really imagine it being very different, but I just don't like some of the cannon shots. I think they could have some sort of black or grey ball inside their animations to indicate a projectile, you know? But at the same time, I just love the fire design and animations in this game. And that is because I am a particular fire affectionate. But don't worry, I'm not an arsonist, I never set fire on anything, on purpose. But what I mean is that fire is my favorite element, and I just love seeing fire being well drawn and animated in video games. But now I'm going to say a thing that will discount points from this section at the expense of increasing the score of another. You will understand it shortly. Metal Slug is a very frenetic game. It has a bunch of different projectiles flying and exploding everywhere, and they noticed that and implemented something that would help the player to localize danger better. Objects and projectiles from the enemies all flash in either orange, red and blue, to be easily distinguished in the environment. This is a game design choice that enhances the gameplay and notifies the player better of what can kill them, at the same time that it turns objects less realistic, that by consequence reduces immersion. They don't apply this type of coloring on our shots and bombs because there is no need to signal the AI about it, but it's easily perceptible when we look at the bombs that they have a design without the flashing colors and the designs with them. And their natural designs are not bad, but they are half of the time being overshadowed by overcoloring. And I have to be honest, this is just the type of thing that happens in good games. Things that have a purpose will sometimes damage other aspects of any game. That is why I don't think I'll ever award a perfect score for any video game, and it's very unrealistic to think the perfect game will ever exist. Perfection is a concept that will never be fit to anything that have multiple levels of complexity. A toothbrush might be the perfect tool to brush your teeth, but to say it's the perfect brushing tool for anything is just not true. It is useless and unproductive to look for perfection in 99% of the things in life. Enhancing something means impairing other in order to produce a wished result, and that is my point of view on the subject. The score for the graphics ended up a 4.7 out of 10. You can see that it almost hit the 5, which is the average score for nowadays term, and for me it was honestly really impressive considering that this game is from 1996. Some things ended up holding it back, like resolution, proportions and some of the aspects about the models, but 4 is still a score where games generally excels in some aspects but fails in others. And that is completely fine. The overall balance ended up slightly negative, but that's far from being a bad looking game.
Metal Slug.
Stepping into the audio section, I'll start by stating that, so far as I am concerned, all of the rights from Metal Slug is owned by SNK Corporation, which, according to their terms of service, using the game's soundtrack in YouTube videos is fine, so I'll be using Metal Slug's soundtracks in this video for you to have a real grasp of what I'm actually talking about in the audio section. And with that being said, let's start. Metal Slug doesn't count with an extended library of soundtracks. Each stage counts with a soundtrack that plays through its progression, and the same boss soundtracks plays for every boss in this game. I wish I could say that in terms of variety this is the bare minimum for this type of game, but not even having exclusive soundtracks for each boss fight is underwhelming to say the least. Because it's not like the soundtracks are even varied within themselves in the first place. They are all very reliant on drums and a blowing instrument that I can't really put my finger on. It might be a trumpet, but I don't know. But that makes all of them seem very similar. I can still compliment that both these instruments, at least from where I'm from, are very characteristic from the instruments that the army usually uses in performances, which suits the theme of the game. That doesn't necessarily mean that the soundtracks are good by no means, but they are not bad in any sense of the word too. The only soundtrack that really caught my attention is the one from the first stage, and to be fair, it might be just a nostalgic attack. The soundtracks are all very fast-paced, like Rush Rush Rush, which is compliant with the game's fast pace and context. After all, you can even go back to explore the stage, you can only go forward, which makes sense, since this game was designed for arcades. You know, you can't have kids going and exploring the stage while others are behind them waiting for their time to play. But independently, the fact is that all of them are very similar in terms of melody, and they are also very similar in terms of pacing, making them all just too similar. Like I said, I like the song from stage 1, but if you present me the soundtracks from all of the stages in like a week maybe, I don't think I can identify which one is which. And since the stages are not stages that commonly call for a certain theme in video games like Egyptian desert, alien related or futuristic dystopian, I can understand why the composers ended up being drawn to a position where they ended up not worrying about giving the stages more identity with them, but in the end what matters is the result. As I said before, the soundtracks aren't bad, they are just regular and very similar to each other. If they were actually bad, I would definitely not be using them in this review, because this is not just a review but the content that is supposed to be enjoyable for you to watch and listen. And in terms of voice acting, there is just not a lot of material and a good load of them are just screams or grunts of fallen soldiers. The voices that are present are the narrators, the main characters, mob soldiers, the guys that are either homeless persons or war prisoners, a bald dude, the last boss, and I think that's it. I might be missing one or two, but it doesn't really matter because the only guy that have any sort of more elaborated lines is the bald dude. And he has the enormous amount of 5 lines. I know it doesn't seem a lot for nowadays standards, but let me remind you that this is an arcade game and he has more lines than the last boss of the game. He can either say go home to your mother, your history, come on boy, or go for a laughter during combat, and when he's defeated he says see you in hell. I like the bald guy. I rarely dislike bald characters in video games because they rarely fail to please me. Big Patches fan here. At the same time that this character have an unusually high amount of voice acted lines for an arcade game, it's important to remember that my reviews are comparative. 5 lines with 3-word sentences on the mini-boss characters from the middle of the game for nowadays standards is virtually a null amount of voice acting. And to make things worse, the quality of the reproduction is not the best either. It's not like you cannot understand what is being said, but it really gives the impression that it was recorded by a really old microphone. Obviously microphones from back in the day weren't as good, so that is expected, but it is still in the game, so I can't just ignore it. But under another perspective, this also might be intentional, since some sequels of this game maintain that characteristic, but in either case, I don't think it's a good thing. But if I have to be honest, I couldn't find a place where I could reproduce them without all of the ruckus from the rest of the game, so my judgment might be imprecise here. I know I must say, and I know it might sound very psychotic, but I swear I don't mean it in any serial killer way. But they made the death screams and the grunts very satisfying. You don't even feel bad when you are hit because the main character's scream is just right, you know? And it's very important that this specific set of voices are not annoying or inadequate because you will hear it a lot while playing it. Every mob character releases a death scream when defeated that varies depending on the way they died, and since you are going to be killing so many mob characters, you will hear it all the time. So it's not loud, it's not annoying, it indicates the enemy being defeated, and like I said, I don't know why, but it's just satisfying, dude. I usually don't like when developers implement death screams on their mob characters on these types of games, due to the amount of repetitiveness, but in Metal Slug, I simply don't have a problem with it at all. And even though there aren't many voices and the sound quality is not in a level where I particularly enjoyed, saying that they didn't know how to use them would be completely wrong. And like I just mentioned, enemies have death screams, and some weapons affect the type of screams they let out, for instance shotgun and flamethrower. But in general, you will hear 3 types of death screams that tends to not repeat itself in succession, meaning that if you kill 2 enemies in sequence, you'll probably hear 2 different screams. And that is a good thing. Now that I think of it, it's probably what makes it so that it doesn't seem repetitive. And picking up weapons also triggers a narrator saying the name of the weapon, what contributes to a great game design trait, that is informing the player about an information through different sources. The weapons have their own visual design and they trigger both a sound effect on pickup and a voice action prompt. That guarantees that you inform your player of what just happened, and this is especially important in a game that has such a fast pace like Metal Slug. And since I just mentioned them, sound effects are also in a level where I was satisfied with. This being a pure cartoon design video game means that there is more freedom when it comes to sound effects. Gunshots don't necessarily need to mimic gunshots in real life, since your graphics are also not trying to mimic real life, if that makes any sense for you. So in my opinion, this type of games have way much more freedom when choosing sound effects while maintaining cohesion. I like the sound effects here. Not all of the effects sound like what you imagine they would in real life, but they are not completely incoherent. They ended up very suiting for the game. And contrasting with the amount of soundtracks, Jesus, the amount of sound effects in this game is just right. Every type of weapon, war machine and explosion have at least one type of sound. When they hit the floor, they produce a different sound from when they hit a tank, for instance. They trigger a sound for when you break the ropes of those prisoners. There is a lot of sound effects variety in this game, and it genuinely impressed me how much care they had for it. And noise pollution is obviously something that is bound to happen in games themed around war, but is undeniable that you won't have any moment of peace for your ears in Metal Slug. This doesn't really get to a point where it's jarring because the game is designed for you to beat in about an hour or so, even shorter than that, so that kinda goes in favor of this game. And as for if the game has 3D audio, like, I can't really say that this is kind of a thing. Some things have a direction indication through the earphones, but a lot doesn't. And in the middle of the ruckus and such an intense soundtrack, it's even harder to identify anything by ear, so it's kinda pointless to try either way. And as for audio timing, I feel like the heavy machine gun have a slight delay in the shooting sound effect. I wasn't able to notice in any other weapons or situations, so it's definitely a thing. Since the heavy machine gun is the most common weapon you can get, this is definitely something that I can't just overlook, but all of the rest seems fine. So the final score for the audio section is a 4.3 out of 10, which is 1 point higher than I expected, but sound effects really pushed the score up here. Soundtracks and voice acting were clearly in an inferior level compared to it, and that really stacked with the natural noise pollution that this game has. I would say that 4 might be even a little bit too generous, but again, the audio in this game is not in a bad state whatsoever, it is just below average if compared to what is out in the market nowadays.
Metal Slug.
Let's start the section looking right at the screen. This in the top left corner is basically everything we have of interface in this game. Of course we still also have the main menu, but let's focus on the interface we can see during the game for now. This number in the top keeps decreasing constantly, so it's assumable that it's a timer. And I say it's assumable because in any of your runs, this timer will never really run out and it doesn't decrease one by one in each second. No, it takes 4 seconds to reduce 1 unity in the timer. So this is a 240 seconds timer that I have no idea why it's not displayed as so. And another thing about this timer is that it resets every time you lose 1 life. So this timer basically means that if you don't complete the stage in 4 minutes, you lose 1 life. You start the game with 3 life points that is indicated by the number 2 right here. Once again we have convoluted information for us to handle. It is displayed as a 2 because if you die with 0 lives, then you lose. And to continue play, you have to insert a credit. I have no idea what this 1-up means and its function. Right above the HP we have a bar that is initially empty, but as soon as we enter a Metal Slug we can see that it fills up. This is the HP for the tank known as Metal Slug. But there is a problem with the design yet again. Metal Slugs can tank 3 hits from the enemy, it doesn't matter the source of it. So it would just be better if instead of a uniform HP bar, we'd had a bar that is partitioned by 2 vertical lines, indicating the amount of hits the Metal Slug can still hold. If all the damage we can take is 1 per hit, then it's way better to have something that tells us the number of hits we can take rather than the regular HP bar. Right above this bar we have our score and increases as you hit enemies. Not when you kill it, but when you hit them. And I am assuming that probably different weapons award different amounts of points. And on the right of those elements we have the weapon bar. Bombs is the amount of bombs we are carrying at the moment, and arms is the ammo of the weapons we are holding. We have an infinite amount of ammo with the pistol, the tank's machine gun and some other structures, but weapons in general have a fixed amount of ammunition. And when we lose all the life points, we have a 10-second time period where we can insert a credit and receive 3 more lives. Why have I just described all of that for you? It's because we have a clear problem in terms of clarity of information. Now, it doesn't reach a point where it gets misleading, and it's not hard for you to make those assumptions I mentioned in maybe 5 minutes of gameplay. However, if I need to make some sort of assumption looking at an interface who is supposed to give me the information I need, then we have a design problem. And the fact that the game has so little interface elements also makes it worse, because it should be easier to test and analyze when there is a problem in fewer elements, but at the same time, the information you need is so simple that it's almost irrelevant if it is transmitted perfectly or not. So it's just a mild problem that is in the game, but it's still a problem. Following up, I could talk about the start and the main menu, but honestly there isn't anything to talk about. It's just a PNG that is not even 1920 by 1080 with some generic interface designs. You know, it's just everything so completely disconnected from the rest of the game, and it just makes it pretty obvious that it was no effort whatsoever invested in this menu for the PC port. Although it doesn't really have a problem with accessibility, it does have a problem with navigation, because you cannot press left and right to change the volume or the resolution, for instance. You can only press a button that increases them until it resets so it's lower value, and I generally have no clue about coding, but I can possibly fathom to imagine this not being one of the first things you learn in this fucking profession. It's not like you cannot go up and down in the menu, you can, so I just can't understand how hard it was to program it to go left and right. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say about the interface. One good thing in the menu is that the options have a brief description, and that's it. For the score, it ended up as a 2.2 out of 10, which is just barely enough to reach a 2. The thing is that the interface of the game itself doesn't really have troublesome problems, and the nature of the game just makes it natural that the interface will be a lower score under my standards. But the menus could easily have increased this score up to a 3 if they were put the minimum amount of effort.
Metal Slug.
Alright, this section will be a little bit different from the rest of the others for what I think it's an obvious reason for anyone who played Metal Slug. But yeah, I am going to explain you why Metal Slug receives a 0 out of 10 for its script, and I swear it's not because the game had a bad writer or because the story is that bad. It's simply because the game doesn't have a story. Now, that doesn't mean that the universe of Metal Slug itself doesn't have a story, it just means that the game does not show that for us in any capacity. In fact, to get to know anything about what is happening, I had to look for a lot of videos on YouTube to finally get to know anything. And now, be honest, I like what I've seen, and it would be great if that was in the game. But it's simply not. Metal Slug was originally designed for Neo Geo, meaning that it was designed to be an arcade game. Kids, myself included, used to have to leave their houses to go to those arcade centers to play their favorite games and compete with other kids for who would have their name listed higher in the ranking on the leaderboard. But actually, the higher rankings were usually occupied by a lonely adult or a bullied teenager that wanted to forget about their insecurities. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's a place where a bunch of kids would wait in line until the other kids that got there before them die in the game or run out of money in order to finally play their video game. So the games needed to be hard, they needed to be short, and they also needed to be interesting in the eyes of a regular kid. Meaning that the less things they need to read, the better. And this is not an exaggeration. Neo Geo games all have those characteristics because their public demanded them. Some had really resumed stories and some just rushed to gameplay since the beginning, and that is it. So it's not surprising that Metal Slug is going to score low in this department. We are just sent into the fray right away, and there is just a few bits of lore we can fish for from what is visually delivered to us. But I'll save that for the universe section. For the script, all the story we are given is that there is a war, we are on it, and we are invading the enemy lines, and that we achieved our goal within the set of missions we're in because we defeated this guy. Whether if that means the war is over or not because of it, it's not clear. The credits display a time-lapse of places we've been to with a bunch of defeated soldiers, grave and destroyed machines, but that doesn't mean the war is over. It only means that the places we've been to, the enemies were majoritarily defeated. And that's it for the script. Let's move on to the next section.
Slug.
In this section, I would like to state that I'll be analyzing the characters under a narrative perspective. You can imagine this section as an appendix from the script, and I'll leave the comments about the gameplay aspects of them in the gameplay section. You can really imagine this section as an appendix from the script. The game have two main characters, although in my gameplay you only see one. And they both have names that are not given to us. They are called Marco and Terma. And in the game they don't have anything that resembles any sort of narrative depth. The only thing going for them is that they seem to be very well humored. The game presents prisoner NPCs that seem to be completely emotionally disconnected with the fact that they are war prisoners, and the mob characters are also just there to serve as mob kill. The game has some boss characters, but most of them are just machines piloted by someone we never meet. The main villain of this game literally have less dialogues than a random mini-boss, so this is just another thing that I simply cannot praise. You know, it doesn't really make any sense for me to try to explain anything here. It's a 0 out of 10, it's plain to sight that the characters are just an avatar that you will control to reach the highest score possible in the game, and the rest of the characters are merely points you will score while doing so. Like I said, and I'll keep saying, a game designed for arcades will have a lot of characteristics, and this is just another of them.
Metal Slug.
As we emerge into the universe of Metal Slug, we are obviously struck by its ambience. The guns, the war machines and the architecture are all directly influenced by the time the game was made, which is in the late 19th century. We have no actual written confirmation that this is the case though, and also no clear proof that this is not an alternate Earth. There are a few things that reference real Earth, like the Italian language in these posters and the language on the stage that might be London, because this is really look like the Big Bang, and the architecture is kinda similar, but also there are things that don't really exist in real Earth. Like the Metal Slugs for instance, and this symbol that I just assume that belongs to the army we are facing, so I just more inclined to believe that it's an alternate Earth. The fact is that the ambience is not clearly informed to us, we have to make assumptions. Plus, the world don't have any sort of lore, immersion features, any complex system like random events and weather differences. The one thing it does have is light cultural differences. Different stages have different architectures and some even have languages written on them, and that definitely counts. The game, however, have a de-exploration feature that blocks you from going back on a stage. Being explained by being an arcade game, but that doesn't change the fact that this is one of the few games ever created that doesn't want you to explore it. And lastly but not least, there isn't any restaging in this game, and considering that this is just a 5-stage game, this is their obligation. The final score is a 1.5 out of 10. As you can see, it's not a well-structured universe, neither in writing terms nor in a palpable way. Run-and-gun games rarely try to explore the universe of their games due to the natural fast pace they have, and Metal Slug is no exception.
Metal Slug.
I will start this section with how the gameplay actually plays out. This is a run-and-gun genre, so as the name suggests, you pick a gun and start running. Metal Slug characters doesn't have HP. Well, technically they do, it's 1 and that includes the players. Machine and bosses have more HP, but I don't know how damage works in this game, but I would assume that the regular pistol deals 1 damage and the other type of weapons like bombs, fire launchers and missiles deal more. I don't think there is a defense concept in this game. So you kill each enemy with 1 shot and machines take more hits to go down. The game has different weapons that work as power-ups. Machine gun have a high fire rate resulting in a lot of DPS, flame launcher shoots shots of flames in front of you and goes a little bit upwards later. Rocket launcher shoots missiles that are slightly humming, and shotgun straight up just shoots like a shotgun. There are also bombs, and you can enter tanks called Metal Slugs that have a machine gun with infinite ammunition and 10 cannon shots. The game basically consists in just going through hordes of enemies, killing all of them while avoiding damage, because as I mentioned before, you also have only 1 HP, so you'll die to literally everything. Making dodging and knowing the enemy patterns is extremely important in this game. As you can see, this type of gameplay is not very complex. There isn't much you have to worry about other than what is coming in your direction. Enemies don't have different types of resistances or anything like that, and you don't really have anything that will customize your playstyle, like having a preferable choice of gun. Because as soon as you die, you will lose that gun, and they also have ammo, so you just kinda have to take what you get. The controls are very responsive. My main issue with the controls is when you enter the Metal Slug. The aim of the machine gun is the same direction you're pressing, and I didn't really enjoy that very much. I also didn't have any problems related to hitboxes, but I see that in some cases it's kinda iffy. In stage 3, jumping on the cliffs might be a little bit hard, due to either hitbox issues or dimensioning of the stage. To be honest, it's borderline impossible to keep track of hitbox in such a frenetic game, but I don't really remember a situation where it was bluntly evident. I went through really close calls, and I think if the hitbox was not in a good level, I would definitely get hit, so I'll just assume that is a problem of the stage and not the characters. Relating to the enemies, in terms of gameplay, there isn't much variety. Soldiers can either bomb you, shoot you, or stab you. They have different types of tanks, but they don't have different types of shots. And to be fair, not even many types of enemies. But you don't really fall into a repetitive hole due to multiple factors. So the lack of more types of enemies is not really a problem. The boss fights of the game are in a nice place though. For instance, in the first boss fight, it forces you to be aware of the platforms, because sometimes it will damage an entire area of the field for a few seconds. The second boss forces you to face up in order to be able to do damage, which is something that will cause one mild extra layer of difficulty to the boss fight. And it is interesting that they made the mini-boss that you have to fight in the middle of the stage having the same design. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but the result is good. The third boss is probably the weakest one in terms of design. The catch here is that you have to face two bosses instead of one, but really you can just choose which one you want to face first, and the other one will likely not interact with you in any way. They shoot one missile that traverses through the lanes, but it's honestly easy to dodge them once you realize that it's happening. They also go down pretty fast too, so it's really underwhelming. The fourth boss is the best in terms of design, but probably the one that people hate the most too. On the contrary of stage 2, this boss requires you to shoot down to deal damage to it, and to shoot down you have to jump, which by itself already imposes limitations to the way you normally play. The boss also fires landmines to the sides of the arena, either forcing you to go even more to the sides or stay on the center. And on top of that, it has an attack that locks on you and shoots some sort of laser beam about 1 second after the start of the animation. So the boss tries to limit your movements with landmines because the only way it can actively deal damage to you requires a cast time. You can also destroy the landmine shooters and the landmines themselves if you focus them with your shots, which gives you room to move around. This is a genuinely well thought through boss fight design and is definitely my favorite from this game. The fifth boss, I also don't like it very much. In fact, I don't like it one bit. The fight is based around overshooting with a diversity of projectiles that honestly will give you little room to think about anything. You can destroy the rockets with your guns, which is a good thing, but really, in my opinion, this fight is a simple DPS check. If you reach this point with enough bombs or a good amount of ammo with a good weapon, it will be over in about 10 seconds, and if you don't, it will probably kill you with something you could barely even figure out. The last boss of the game was quite a letdown for me. It's basically like the same boss from stage 2, but this time it will test if you really understood that you can destroy rockets with your guns. Because you're really gonna need that knowledge here. But the problem here is that at some point the boss will simply start bombarding the whole field from right to left with missiles, and that would be okay if you could aim up and destroy the missiles with a regular gun, and technically you can, but it takes 3 shots to destroy one missile, and when you destroy one, there is another one falling on you right next to it right away, making that attack just a mass AoE delete, and this is just not good. For the last boss fight, I felt like it was just very underwhelming and it doesn't feel at all like a boss fight. It feels very unfair, to be honest. The gameplay of Metal Slug gets a 5.3 out of 10, which is honestly about what I expected. Controls, hitboxes and enemies are in a good level, but the gameplay itself is very simple and some lackluster in boss fights turn the times for the score not being much higher. At the end of the day, you can't have a bad time playing Metal Slug. You will just find out that there isn't many reasons for you to replay it again and again, so that's it.
Metal Slug.
First of all, it will be important that we make one thing clear. If you watch my previous review, you might remember something about predatory systems in games. And for some, a natural assumption might be that since arcade games are designed to take money out of kids, their foundations are naturally structured around predatory systems. I understand that this is an argument, but bear with me here, okay? Because I don't agree with this point of view. Video games that have predatory systems, like basically every gacha game and 100 of other Android games, there are some things that create this predatory environment for players, like fear of missing out, aka FOMO, fragmentation of the concept of money, and loot boxes, also known as gambling, that people refuse to admit as gambling just because they tell you what the odds are for what you're gambling. But it's also not like you don't know what you're getting at a casino. I guarantee you won't find a confused customer that just won a game of blackjack asking, "Oh, what do I get now?" Dopamine's what you get, motherfucker, now take those coins and raise the bet so you can get rich! Those 3 systems for me are the trinity of what whale hunting tools are in video games. And it's the reason why I think designing video games for arcades is not inherently designing a video game to predate money from kids. I will apply this trinity of systems in Metal Slug to prove my point. The game doesn't have a battle pass, neither a daily login quest you need to do in order to start the game with a slug for instance, or get more life points. This simply doesn't exist here. So there is nothing making you think that you'll be damaged for not opening the game every day. In order to play a match of Metal Slug, you need to insert a coin that you buy from the cashier for a fixed amount of money. Let's use $1 for 1 coin. You will always receive 1 coin for $1 and 1 coin awards you 3 life points in Metal Slug. There is no chance of getting more or less life points or anything like that. You know what you're paying for and what you get never change. And as for fragmentation of money, you can argue that the coins are a sort of fragmentation of money, but in reality, the intention to make you forget how much money you are spending for a piece of cloth for your character is not really there. I can see another point being made here that knowing that arcade games are made for kids, designing a machine that accepts money indefinitely is inherently unethical. And I can see that being an argument, but really, we have to take context for everything in life. Arcades were out around the 80s and the 90s, which is a pretty different time from the days we are living. Nowadays, the way kids spend money on video games is through their parents' credit card or even through theirs in some cases. And if it is easier for adults to spend their money if they don't have to physically hand over the money, imagine how that is for kids. So nowadays they can buy anything they want with all of your money on your bank at their disposal. You should really not give access to credit cards for your kids. Back in the day, you needed to ask for your parents for money, tell them how you're gonna spend it, and then they would think how much they would give it to you if they wanted to give you any. I'm sure a lot of you still slipped a few bucks out of their wallets when they weren't looking, but the limit was also how much was in their wallet to begin with. And the point I'm trying to make here is, you used to have as much as your parents wanted you to spend at the arcades back in the day. And they didn't give you much because they know you were a little child and would spend everything on stupid shit. Well, nowadays this is still true. I feel like spending money on video games and the amount of money parents allow their children to spend became more culturally acceptable because the parents of this generation are the kids that used to play arcades in the 90s and they see themselves on their kids. Then they see their kids asking for the money to play the type of video games I mentioned before, and since they had an experience that was not predatory when they were at their age, they assume it's the same thing, but it's really not. There is a lot of psychological manipulation and gambling addiction normalization that are involved in many online video games nowadays, and I think that's very prejudicial for kids. But I don't know if I made my point clear. Metal Slug and arcade games are not inherently predatory just because there is no ceiling for how much you can spend on them. The only thing I think is borderline predatory is the fact that there is a leaderboard on them, and that might lead to a competing addiction and would create a behavior on kids that would indulge them to spend more money because of a compulsion. But competing with others is also the baseline of every sport there is. And I don't think there is anything bad in doing sports, and a lot of sports also require money investment in teaching classes and materials if you want to enhance your performance. So I can't really put my finger in how predatory this leaderboard end up being for kids. But now that we are over that bridge, let's continue with the other systems of the game. Metal Slug have an item system that is actually its battle system in a way. In the game you can pick up new weapons that are basically power-ups with a stipulated number of ammo. And since the battle system consists in basically pressing one button to deal damage and avoiding it with your movement, those items are really the only way to alter the gameplay. The game also presents the Metal Slug, that are tanks that you can get in that can take up to 3 hits for you. They are also just power-ups in every sense of the word, but with a different depletion system. In general, the combat is simple, yet satisfying because it's fair. You can die in one hit, but your enemies too. Your tank can take a few more hits, and the enemy tanks too. And you can even get some weapons that will deal more damage to those types of enemies that your enemies can't get, so it's really more favorable to you in the most case scenarios. The combat system is simple but yet satisfying, which is actually kinda tricky to pull out, so it's a nice thing. The game also counts with a scoring system that foments a competitive environment which is congruent with the type of gameplay and gives more longevity to the game. Two good things. And the last thing I need to approach is the originality of the systems in Metal Slug, and I can't really say there is any. I mean, Metal Slug's battle system could even be the first of its kind, but I would still argue that there is not anything original to begin with. It would be like trying to revindicate that boiled egg is an original recipe. Well, at some point it was, but it's not like it was the hardest thing in the world to come up with. Metal Slug receives a 1.4 out of 10 for its systems, which is fine for the type of gameplay it has, and you know, it is what it is. The game is still fun even without all those systems, but as I always say, less content equals less value, so that's it.
Metal Slug.
Metal Slug doesn't have the problems that regular titles have in their games, like barely points in progression, balancing and notification clarity. In fact, notification clarity is one of the strong points I mentioned in the graphics section. However, some things about Metal Slug leave things to wish for. The game have no introduction whatsoever, you just literally fall into the fray right away. There isn't even a tutorial. You're just not literally on your own to understand the game because in general it doesn't demand much thought process from the player, and the only thing that might get you confused is displayed on the screen with something signaling it, but it doesn't show what you need to press to leave the Metal Slug though. The game is also designed to be hard, one hit and you lose one life, and there is a lot of enemies on the screen most of the time, which is congruent with the arcade context, and I don't think it's a bad thing, especially because you can choose between different difficulty levels, and I played on both medium and very hard, and both experiences were satisfactory. Medium is about the experience I remember having when I played in the arcades, and very hard adds more enemies on the screen and increases the HP of bosses. And this is one of the few games where I don't find it sloppy or lazy, because giving more life to the bosses makes it so you have to be more consistent with the boss mechanics and award you for not dying previously, because you could reach the boss inside the Metal Slug or with a good weapon for instance, and it also awards you for saving bombs for the boss fights. And because of that, I like how the way difficulty is implemented in this game. Especially because deaths are both punishing and forgiving at the same time. It only depends on your goal. If your goal is to score the most amount of points possible, then you want to be punished by your deaths, since you lose point multipliers when it happens, but when you are just casually playing, points don't even matter. The PC version have the best of both worlds, and that's great. Game design in Metal Slug is a 5.3 out of 10, being a total average level of game design for the type of game it is. The lack of introduction and even the tutorial hurts this game quite a bit, I'm not gonna lie. The thing that also holds the score back too is the lack of content for me to analyze that stopped me from being able to judge how much they understand about game design. But overall, thanks to a few details I was able to notice, I understood that they actually understand the key components that this genre demands. That's why I think they presented a decent level of game design.
Metal Slug.
Let's go over this one, Vaptvupt. You can change the volume of the game, but not separately. You can choose between 8 languages to play, but changing the language only changes the description of the menu options and some message prompts, so it's a weird level of localization. Not even the menu language itself were modified when I changed the languages. You can remap the controllers, but not all buttons from the keyboard are available, and neither any mouse button. And also the default settings didn't bother me in any way. You can change the resolution, aspect ratio, and opt for either full screen or window mode, not borderless window though. And you can also put scan lines over the screen if you want to feel nostalgic, which is a charming touch. You cannot customize the graphics in any sort of level, and this PC port also have a really big problem, because incredibly it has frame drops, which is just unacceptable for the type of game it is. No machine should ever have any problem running this game in any point, even in 30 FPS. And when your port is outperformed by an emulator, you know you did a bad job at it. But I also didn't experience any glitches during my playthrough, and neither have I found evidence of them existing in the version I'm analyzing. All things considered, the settings in Metal Slug receive a 3.7 out of 10. Have the frame drops not ever been a thing, this game would definitely score at least 4. And that is because this game have basic settings customization, just up to a point that is up to date with the average games we have nowadays. But at the end of the day, this game has inferior settings than most titles out there. The final score for Metal Slug is 28.4 out of 100. And for me this is quite sad because I was hoping it would score at least 30 or maybe 40. But I can totally understand the low grade. The game have no level of writing whatsoever in multiple departments, the soundtrack is not bad but leaves a lot to wish for, and even though the game plays nice and all, there isn't much to it when you try to run deep into it. Metal Slug for me is in a position where it definitely has something going for it, but it's just outclassed by so many other titles that if you compare it to other similar options, it's very unlikely that you choose Metal Slug. I think the way people usually opt to play is out of pure nostalgia, or if they want to play a quick game with someone else, like in a get-together or when your cousin comes over to visit you, you know? A few people, of course, will opt to go for the highest score possible to have their names on the leaderboard, but that's simply not the usual Metal Slug player. Metal Slug is one of the best games that came out for Neo Geo. It is an icon from the arcade era and it still offers a lot of fun for us to enjoy. In the same way, I hope that you enjoyed this video, I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and that is it from me folks, stay safe and bye bye!